when a journalist said to Mother Teresa of Calcutta, "People say you're a saint. What do you think about that?" And she answered back, "And why aren't you?" Because by the time you're thinking like that, there's nobody home. And so it's not even humility, it's just self-honesty. Of course I'm trying to be a saint. And, if there's nobody home, there's nobody home. It's just the way it works. I'm not claiming that by any means, but I understand it. Because I lived with Kriyananda for 40 years. So I sort of saw it in action. I saw, oh, you can just function in this world so dynamically and be so engaged and just be doing it from a different dimension. Calmness is actually a large part of that. Swamiji said to me at one point, because I remain calm, he said, you think I don't feel things deeply. He said, my feelings are actually far more sensitive than almost everyone because there was no fear. We block our feelings because we're afraid. He said, I remain calm, so you think I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling it very deeply, everything. It's just calmness is an aspect of God, and what does it serve us to move away from that? And thank you very much for the things you said. It's such a paradox that the mind just gets confused, but it's really good to hear. And that's why after a while you get happy, because you just realize that it's not your problem. This is just who I am, and this is what I have to work out, and it's really God's problem. It's not mine. He made me like this, and if I'm a mess, He'll straighten it out, It's not my story. I'm here, and I'm the actor on the stage. We're really the actors on the stage. That's the most interesting part. I have a question that someone put on my chair here, which was, and the question is, okay, this is a question that everybody's asking everybody. Am I supposed to act to try to make this world better? Or am I just supposed to let it go to hell in a handbasket like it looks like it's doing without my ever trying to, put out a stop? What is my responsibility in this situation? It's a very, very good question. Okay, let me try to get this straight. I was born in 1947, which is, of course, just the end of the Second World War. My parents were both born in this country, but the Jewish heritage from Eastern Europe, Romania, Poland, Russia, that's where the people all came from. Totally invested here, no relatives in Europe. Nonetheless, the fact of being Jewish anywhere in the world after World War II, you thought about it a lot. And so it was always there. I was also raised in the Jewish context where religion, we weren't religious, we were cultural Jews. I mean, and those of you in the room who grew up that way know exactly what I'm talking about. And social justice was, of course, an enormous part of the way we thought. My father, we were in Texas for a while, and my father helped integrate this place and integrate that. I asked him once, if we were in Mississippi, would you be able to do this? And he couldn't say that he would, because if he had jeopardized our family, he wouldn't have done it. Texas was enough on the edge where he could be helpful without it being dangerous. The freedom summer of the civil rights movement happened when I was about 16 or 17, and I wanted to go to the South. I thought my parents would want me to go. I was astonished when the answer was something like, absolutely not, because of course it was dangerous, and they couldn't do that. They just couldn't. I understand it now. I was quite surprised at the time. What did I know? So always in the back of my mind, always growing up, has been this sort of line in the sand. How much do you risk? How much do you do? At what point are you morally compromised? When are you compelled? It's really been a very big issue for me. It used to be much stronger than it is now. Okay, I'm putting all this together. Once again, I'm telling you my own story because there's elements in it that you'll all recognize. I didn't have a passport until I was 35, I think. I lived on the Mexican border for a while and growing up, so I did leave the country But at that point, you could just walk back and forth across the border, which is really terrible because you could start drinking if you could walk, if you walked into Mexico. So there was a lot of teenage drunkenness because they just walk across the border. But anyway, that was where I was. So then eventually I went to Europe, and then I went to India for the first time in 1986, which was just before India started on this heroic economic upgrade. At that point, they were still so strongly influenced by Gandhi that they were closed to foreign corporations. You know, Gandhi's repulsion of the British influence, they just shut India to anything outside of India in order to reestablish. And in 86, they were still closed. In either 87 or 88, Pepsi-Cola entered India and launched from the Taj Mahal. And that was the beginning. And by a year later than that, when we went back to Varanasi, there were signs for Coca-Cola on the sides of the rowboats of the people who took you up and down the river. And that was the beginning of the Great New Age in India. You know, sometimes things get worse before they get better. Swami's comment about India, just by the way, he said it's far too important to the culture of the world to remain backwards. It has so much to offer. It has to come into the modern age, which is what it's done now. But in 1987, when I went there, I'd never been out of I traveled by then to Western Europe and around the U.S., but I'd never been outside of that energy. 4 a.m, when the plane lands and you're in the bus and you're looking out the window and, you know, what is that heap over there? Oh, that's a family living on the sidewalk. That's somebody sleeping on the highway median, you know, and this is some little old woman sitting on the sidewalk selling garlic 1 clove at a time. I mean, this is just not a world that I was used to at all, what to speak of beggars and so on. And it was self-evident to me that we have all the money, we have all the technology, we have all the capacity in the world to make this heaven on earth effortless. The only problem is we don't want to. You know, we're just collectively more interested in ourselves and various things. And the other part of it, which is also true, is not God's plan yet. It's just not the way things are operating. But I really realized on a very deep level that whatever's manifesting in the material world that doesn't look beautiful, the problem is not in the world out there. The problem is the human heart. It's just, this is the karma of the planet at this time. And it's not a mistake. It's that the vibration of the planet right now, which is extremely mixed, it's a very heterogeneous place where you have wonderfully inspired, saintly, you know, God-inspired individuals and a whole lot of demons, you know, in human form. There was a visionary from Germany from like 3 or 4 centuries ago, I don't remember when. Her name is Anne Catherine Emmerich. I don't know if everything she saw was true or not. She's the Catholics have, I think maybe she's beatified, you know, she's on the way, okay. She's on the way, and somebody, because she was German, somebody was very Germanic and wrote down everything she said, you know, very organized. So there's volumes about her. Just very detailed visions of Jesus' life. They're very interesting, just by the way. But one of the things she said, she spoke of this particular time in history, this 100-year period maybe, and she says, oh, a lot of demons will be let out of hell during this period of time. Yeah, how about that one? And basically you sort of look around and it kind of looks like that. Like, you know, there's just a lot of crazy people here. What is really so annoying is that we're all equally loved by God. It's really annoying. And and we all have the opportunity, we are all given, just like the caterpillar and the butterfly we were answering this morning. We weren't answering the butterfly, we were talking about the butterfly. That everybody, once you reach the human level, you get to choose. And of course, we fight for that. When I was first teaching beginning meditation classes and talking about the gurus and all of this, and people would say, you know, I don't want anybody running my life. And I would say, honey, no such luck. You know, we would love to have somebody run our lives, most of us, somebody we could trust, but you don't get to, because you have to earn it for yourself, and you have to earn it for yourself because you actually understand the choices that you're making. And the great love that God has for us, I mean, the mother-child, father-child is the perfect image to understand the God-devotee relationship. If the father tries to make the child do something and force them to do that, it doesn't work. If the mother tries to force them to do it, it doesn't work. We just have to learn for ourselves. I mean, I had the stupidest experience, but it was just like that. Someone told me, don't put the suitcase on the hood of the car, which I had done, because the wheels will scratch it or something like that. Really? Okay. So I didn't believe them. So I put the suitcase on there and I pulled it off and I scratched the car just like that. And it was such a dumb thing, but I thought, now I know. And I didn't know just because someone told me. I had to scratch the car before I really knew. And think how many times people tell you that attitude is not going to work, that's not going to help you. But you don't know until you do it. You know, that person you love is an alcoholic. No, they're not. And everybody knows that they are. That one of my friends made a very poor marital choice, and I, thinking that it would be helpful to her, suggested to her before she made that choice that it was a terrible choice. She went ahead with it, and after it turned out to be a terrible choice and fell apart because we were friends, she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I did. I told her exactly where we were and what I had said." Nothing, but then she knew, because you don't learn except from experience. So just as we know that's true for us, that's true for all of God's children. So the great, marvelous complexity of creation is that, according to Yogananda, there are countless inhabited planets. Swami Kriyananda said, "Do we always come back to Earth? Do we just keep reincarnating to Earth?" "Oh, no." Master said, "No, not at all. There are countless inhabited planets. And we just go where we need to go." Yeah, he said, how preposterous that we would be the only place in all of creation where there's intelligent life. I mean, that's not very humble. It's not very sensible either. And each of these planets has a cycle. As I mentioned, I think I just casually mentioned it. It's called the yugas. This is an ancient Indian teaching. And it was also true in many ancient civilizations. I can't remember exactly the cultures, but the ages. There would be the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, the Silver Age, the Golden Age. There would be the age of man, the age of heroes, demigods, and gods. It's always four, and it's always going in increasing stages of awakening, because for some reason the myriad of God's children are at all different places, and they need all different experiences. And Master also said we don't always come back to Earth because we would figure it out too soon. Now that's also one of those very annoying things. Like, why wouldn't we be expected to figure it out fast? I don't know. But the fact is, think about this. Once you really learn something, you really know it. It is your consciousness has changed. It's not just that you've been punished and you're not going to, touch the wire again because it's going to burn you. It's much deeper than that. You just know this is not going to make me happy. And even if the momentum of our past habits pushes us into it, there's a certain point which you just know this is not going to make me happy anymore. And you are permanently changed and you can't go back. It's not like I just had a good day. And even if, again, as I say, you fall into the same habit, sometimes because you can't help it, your temper is your enemy, or you really should not eat the whole box of cookies. 2 of them maybe, but not the whole box. I developed the habit, and when things like that were plaguing me, I'd open the box and put most of it down the garbage disposal. It was boom, like that. Just get rid of it, because I knew, the impulse. That's never been a big issue for me, but you understand. You try to do a little better than your worst. And that's progress. I'm being serious about that one. You just don't try to do your best, just do better than your worst. Because if you can do better than your worst, then you always feel victorious. You just lower the bar. But you're still going in the right direction because you still know what you want. But in any case, there's this cycle, and it's a whole enormous class in itself, and I can talk more about it. But it's based on scientific facts. At the center of the galaxy, there is an enormous wellspring of energy. This is, astronomers are talking about this. It's just this mysterious energy force. And the story of the yugas is that our whole solar system, we have a dual. And because we have a dual, we're kept in an elliptical orbit. We, meaning the planet, I say us because this is where we are. And we move closer and then farther away from the center of that galaxy. And depending how close we are to the center of the galaxy is how enlightened civilization can be on this planet. And this is not a drama of individual self-realization. This is what's going on the planet. And so when we need a planet that is very dark and very coarse in its understanding, we incarnate on one that's not so close to the center of the galaxy. It may be Earth at that particular time. And it's a 24,000-year cycle. So it's, of course, not within the memory of man. But this is the explanation of, like, how did they build those pyramids? Was it, in fact, thousands of Jews, pulling those rocks up there like Cecil B. DeMille explained to us? Is that really how it happened? Then how come they're so exact? It doesn't make any sense. Swami Kriyananda wrote a children's book, a storybook. It's called The Time Tunnel. And he had you going backward and forward in time, the two children, who he named after himself and his brother, Donnie and Robert, going backwards and forwards in time. And he went back to the age of the Egyptians, backwards from our perspective, backwards, and talked about moving the blocks with the power of sound waves. He described this marvelous scene where there's all these musicians with these unusual instruments, and they play the instruments and the rocks get moved into place. Yeah, I mean, it's not very far-fetched. Have you ever had a kidney stone removed now by sitting in a bath of water and having it be pummeled to pieces with sound waves? Have you ever had what do they call when you're pregnant? Sonogram, right. Like what? And we just take it for granted now. We don't even think about it. So it's 4 ages ascending, 12,000 years, and then you reach the apex of it, then it starts coming down again. The nadir of this cycle was 500 years after Jesus died. So Jesus was born and lived at the worst possible time on this planet, which is why I'm pointing out that it's not about individual self-realization. Masters and saints and serious yogis come at all times. It's great being born in a really dark age going down, because you can just turn your back on society. You don't have to think about it at all. You just get to go out in the desert, you get to go into a monastery, you get to go up into a cave, because there's just no point in trying to uplift society. Where we are now, in the year 1900, once it hits the nadir of the Dark Age, it's been going down, down. Now it's the same general understanding, but it's going up. And it started going up, and in 1700 it began to shift, and in 1900 it really shifted. Now think about how the world has changed since 1900. Everything, probably everything we're looking at didn't exist. Just materials, technology, the microphone, the internet, go on and on and on. And it's not that those things were not possibilities. Swami Kriyananda's father was an oil geologist for Asha, and he went around the world, and he was in Romania. That's where Kriyananda was born. The oil in Romania had been bubbling up out of the ground for generations. So it was always there, but no human mind could figure out what to do with it. And so then all of a sudden we discover realities that weren't there. And so all this technological change is part of the new age. We're in a completely new age, because the results of a new age are a gradual unification. Because we can communicate with each other, we can see each other, we understand each other. Before all of this, you could live in a valley in Switzerland and you never knew the people on the other side of the hill. What to speak of the people in Africa, or the native peoples on this continent or any of that. But now it's just taken for granted. I live in Silicon Valley. There is no dominant culture where I live. There's three basic groups. Asians, which is Indians, Japanese, Chinese, that's 1/3. 1/3 is Spanish language as the first language. And the last third is everybody else, you know, which includes a great many Russians and Europeans and goodness knows. It's where I live is the beginning of where everybody's going to live. And it's already mixed up everywhere, but it's particular in California. I went to Delhi to visit a friend who, Ananda has a center there, and she's an American, she's an African American who's been living in India for years, and she's become the unofficial pujari for the Starbucks there. And when they opened a new branch, they brought her in to do the whatever the ceremony that you have to do to bless the place. So she has a permanent gift card. So our temple in Palo Alto is right across the street from Starbucks, right there. I mean, you're always across the street from Starbucks in California, wherever you are. So it's across the street. So she takes me over there to her Starbucks, and we're sitting in this Indian mall, and I go in, and it's full of young Indian men and women on their Apple computers drinking their coffee. It looks exactly like the Starbucks across the street from our temple in Palo Alto. It's full of young Indian people on their Apple computers drinking coffee. I mean, really, same world. 50 years ago, 25 years ago, would that have been true? So, I mean, you don't need to be an oracle to see it shifting. But here's the big problem, which is the age of matter is still very strongly imprinted on a lot of people's minds. And the nature of the age of matter is that physicality is the definition. And physicality makes everything look separate. Okay, I never asked you to sing. I'll ask you to sing in a minute. Okay? It makes everything look different. Einstein tells us that it's energy all the way down. But I don't fall through. It's separate. And I can bang up to you and I can hug you as tight as I want to. But at the end we separate. Because physicality makes us seem separate. So even though Isha Das tells us accurately that we're all children of God, and we're all God, when we're thinking in terms of matter, it sure don't seem like that, do it? It seems really different. And all of that separation leads to, my religion is better than yours, my skin tone is obviously more important than your skin tone, you know, and women should be this, because look how different women are than men. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And everybody's against everyone and wants to keep it that way. Because security comes from my having the strong individual definition that I can impose on the world. And these are very turbulent transitions, because we're coming from the lowest age to the next highest. There's a cartoon in New Yorker magazine I saw years ago, after Einstein told us that this is an energy universe. And the cartoon is, you know, in their way, all these characters. And it's a New York City street, and there's all the different characters on the street. There's the vegetable dealer over here, and there's the street sweeper over here, and the taxi cab driver, and the woman pushing her little perambulator with the baby in it like this. But everybody has paused in whatever work they're doing, and they're all sort of thoughtfully thinking like this. And then the caption is a direct quote from Einstein. You know, mankind must gradually adapt itself to the energy nature of the universe. And everybody is contemplating how they're going to adapt to the energy nature of the universe. But that's a very hard adaptation. And there are many, many who absolutely think it's wrong. They just think it's wrong. You know, we need to make America a white Christian country again. And we think, good luck, honey. I mean, good luck. Once, you know, the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's not going back in because it's just over. Because there's a force much bigger. But you see, also, and I mentioned this the other night, everything happens first from ideas, then from energy applied to that idea, and then it finally manifests. Okay, so by the time it's manifested, it's the end of the cycle. It's not the beginning. I mean, I was in San Francisco in the late 60s and the 70s. That was when all of the Indian teachers started coming to America. I mean, it was, I think the word I want to use is it was a zoo. It was really just completely crazy, absolutely marvelously fun and utterly nuts, you know, with just this whole thing just taking over. And once it started, it wasn't going to stop. And some of them were valid and some of them were not, but it played itself out. But once we know these things, we can't unknow them again. The vibration begins to change. But that doesn't mean that people aren't going to try. So what's happened, you see, is this whole new thought form has come in. And people who are in tune with that new thought form have incarnated here, because this is a very exciting, fun time to come in when you're the future. So we have the ideas, we begin to put energy into them, we physically incarnate and start putting lots of energy into it. This place did not exist, 20 years ago, or maybe it started 20 years ago. Ananda did not exist 50 years ago. You know, just like none of it was there. But now, it's everywhere. You know, yoga studios, meditation studios. One of my New York City friends says, I can't live anywhere except if I can look out the window and see 3 or 4 yoga studios, you know, so that I can always have one that's open that I can go to. Just like we take that for granted. Everywhere. I go to the Chicago airport and you know, just this little place that just looks like nothing. But, you know, everything is advertised in terms of its ecological value and its this value and its vegetarianism. And on the plane, they're serving a little packet of chocolate sea salt quinoa wafers, right? How many of you could spell quinoa a few years ago? You know, but there it is. This is the airplane. You know, this is nothing special because it's changed. So there's the group of people who came here to make the future, and the group of people who's determined that the future will look like the past. But since those people are at the crest of their last cycle, you know, they have, nuclear weapons and armies and national budgets and the media. So this is not a joke, what's going on now. And this is not something that we can just affirm away, meaning, oh yeah, it's all going to be fine. It's just going to be fine. When Yogananda was living, and he died in 1952, Swami Kriyananda was there from 1948 until Yogananda's passing. Master often said, you don't know what a terrible cataclysm is coming. He predicted, I don't mean to scare you, but this is the truth. I didn't hear him myself, but it's written down. He predicted 2 world wars, 2, not just 1, 2 more world wars by the end of the 1900s. So, as Swami said, time is the most difficult thing in prophecy. But the forces are there. Just listen to the, quote, so-called music. You know, as Swami said, you listen to the popular music and they said, it sounds like the world just wants to fight. You know, everybody's screaming at each other. I went on holiday to Costa Rica once, and I thought they were having a public execution down by the swimming pool. It just turned out it was music. I mean, you know, people were just screaming in pain as far as I could see. But it was just what people thought would be relaxing if you were on holiday. You know, not my taste exactly. And we can make certain jokes about it. Now let me finish. You see, what's really the problem now is atheism, or a very wrong understanding that people call religion. It's both. Yeah, I go for exercise to swim at the YMCA, which I remind you is the Young Men's Christian Association, which is open on Easter. It's like the Young Men's Christian Association is inviting you to the gym on Easter morning. Like, what is wrong with this picture? You know, it's just, I was in England recently, and in every small English town there's some magnificent cathedral. And you could see that sometimes they're wedged in now among modern buildings, but you know that when those churches were built, they were the heart and soul of the life in that village. And everything else was small by comparison. And everything about life went through those churches. Nothing now. Now sometimes they stay alive by teaching yoga, which I think is adorable. Okay? But it's just like, but you see, nothing has replaced it. Nothing has replaced it, although I read somewhere recently, except maybe politics. But it's not there. And we're here, and we're taking the best of the past, but we're a whole new idea. We're not white Christian America. We're self-realization, which is to say the only place that God can be realized, as Master said, is within the human heart. And we are the divine. We're saying what Jesus said, but we can just say it more explicitly and clearly than he said it, because the culture has changed. So we're here for the future, they're here for the past, but Yogananda said it will be a cataclysmic shift, because people need to be awakened again to the need for God and just put us back on an even keel. And after it's all over, and the good thing about nuclear weapons is if it goes to nuclear war, it won't last very long. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it won't be really awful. But the purpose of it is to awaken people to the need for God. It's not a punishment. It's just awakening people to what they've forgotten. And in many of the prophets, and you can see it around you without even needing a prophet, you come out of it like, what was I thinking? I was in mad pursuit of what? And now I begin to realize where the truth is. So here's another piece of it. Yogananda said, those who love God will be protected. And Swami said, at what level? Master didn't say. Because everybody dies. So that doesn't mean we'll never die. But it's very interesting, because this is what it means. We don't need to be kicked awake. We don't need to be forced to think differently, because we're already in motion. So even if the fire starts, we're already in motion. We're moving ahead of it. And more than that, we have to be here to rebuild it, to just help people understand. And my belief, after being all around the world, is it'll take us about 5 minutes to get organized. Because fundamental to what everyone in this room is thinking is, I can't take my happiness at your expense. We're in this together. We're all children of God. I don't care what you look like, where you come from. We're all of the same cloth. We just have to clear the decks a little bit from all this confusion that's happened. So having said all of that, which I've been thinking about and talking about for a long, long time, I met Swami. I moved to Ananda Village in 1971. When we were moving around the calendar toward 72, Swami said, maybe this will be the year. And 72 wasn't, 73, 74, 75, 76 wasn't. But every year Swami said, maybe this is the year. Because in 1952, Master made it seem like tomorrow. And he didn't just mean that things would get rough. He meant things that would really change. Just really change. And there'll be a long exhalation. And Master said the future will be small intentional communities, living close to the land in a natural way. He was a master. He knew what he was seeing. And many people say all of these things. The question is really simple. What are we supposed to do? And that's what the question is. What are we supposed to do? I'm going to go back to my Jewish heritage. And I used to read a lot of stories about a lot of scary things because I was scared. And so I read countless heroic stories of war, of famine, of abuse, of everything, just to understand how you face it and live into it. And I've always, and this is my way of thinking about it, at some point during World War II in Poland, the Jews were all in a ghetto, and somehow somebody knew that ghetto was going to be destroyed, and this emergency was organized to bring as many children, as many babies out of the ghetto as they could before everybody died. I mean, these are horrible things to contemplate. But I think, okay, that's the inflection point. If the rescue the babies from the Warsaw Ghetto moment, when the moral imperative has nothing to do with politics, just has to do with humanity. Right now we're working more with politics. And going back to the human heart, when I was in India, it was like I realized that I was one of the most politically active people I knew. And at that point, I wasn't even registered to vote and hadn't been for a long time, because I would look at the candidates and I would say, this one is a little better than that one, but none of these are my people. This is just simply not my world out here. But my job has always been to inspire the human heart. And gradually I came to understand, to open ourselves to God. Because once that begins to happen, you see, that's what really starts changing things. That not only changes individuals, it changes the karma. Because, as I was saying last night, what really changes people is an increase of light. So our first job, our very first job, is our consciousness. Because thoughts have more power than anything else, because it's an energy universe. Even though they have material ways of doing things, the real power is consciousness. And so every moment that we act to spread light into the world, we went out for lunch today. We had a waitress there. I doubt if she knows Yogananda's name or knows how to chant Om or anything like that. But she was such a good waitress. And she was so enthusiastic, and she was so positive with us, and she was so glad to see us. I just thought, good for you, lady. Whatever your karma is, you've just committed yourself to it, and you're doing it with as much light as you possibly can. And I felt changed just seeing her be herself with such dynamic enthusiasm. And it created an aura, and that aura begins to spread. And you can go argue with some politician, and you can go, if you want to, go out on the street and stand for what you stand for. But your body being on the street is not really what's going to change it. What's going to change it is the vibration you put into the atmosphere. Because that's what we're really working to create. So don't feel that you're powerless. And don't feel that your contribution is insignificant. And that's why you were born. That's why you were born here at this time, to live here at this time. Because we have to witness for a new possibility. And that's a possibility of consciousness. It's not a possibility. The action will come, but we're at the causal thought level, putting energy into the new thought. That's where we are right now. We'll have a chance to build a new society, at least some of you will, depending on what year is the actual year. Swami Kriyananda expected to be here, and he's not. He's been gone 13 years. And so he didn't end up staying for whatever it is. It's been predicted I'll live to be 103. I don't know whether that's good or bad news. But in any case, so maybe I'll see more of it. Who knows? We just don't know. But to be afraid is to fail in our duty. Because fear is the great destroyer. I mean, that's what all those people who are trying to keep the future to look like the past, they're scared. They're frightened on some level, no matter how much they're puffing around. They're frightened. They're frightened that they're out of control. There's two stages of serious spiritual development. One is and every stage of spiritual development has a quality of what makes you feel secure. And this is actually the caste system in India, 4 stages. It's the 4 stages, which the caste system is actually a definition of spiritual growth. It's not a social system. It became a social system as the planet got duller and duller and more dense. It became a physical thing. The lowest level of consciousness, as we develop, is that we try to make ourselves secure by making ourselves unconscious. That's all. We deal with things by drinking or by oversleeping or by overeating or overindulgence. And we put out as little energy as possible, and if we're not aware of it, then we pretend it's not happening. And you see people like that all the time. The second level is when we begin to put out energy, but that energy is put out mostly for our own benefit. And the idea of security comes is when I can control that world around me, then I will be safe. And it very often focuses on money and the power it gives me, or making you behave the way I think you should behave. I'm the man, you're the woman, you listen to me, you're my son, you do what I say. Because then I'll feel safe if the external world behaves. The difficulty with that is, let me think, oh yes, it doesn't work. Because everything happens out there, and the karma is bigger than my opinion. We talked about that a lot this morning, last night. It just doesn't work. And so gradually we try and try and try and try and try, and we realize it doesn't work. But the need to be secure is still intensely there. And then it occurs to us, it's not actually circumstances that are causing my reality, it's my response to circumstances. That's the key. And my inner world is a place where I really have some control. But not at first, because of all those nasty little vrittis in the chakras that are still whirling around with all of this momentum from everything that we've done up until this point. And so even if you wanted to take that turn off on the freeway, you were going too fast and you missed it. Even if you wanted to have this reaction, your mouth was faster than your mind and you had a different reaction. And then you have to work your way back around from that. But once you reach that point, once you begin to realize, oh yeah, happiness, the whole story, even the circumstances of my life actually emanate from my inner consciousness. Then you're really on the road. Then you're at the beginning of real success. And the reason we have incarnated collectively in such an incredibly uncertain time, which is bad and looks like it's getting worse, every time I read or hear about the next outrage, I just say, oh yeah, this is what a collapsing society looks like. Civilizations collapse. It's happened many times in history. It's just that we are so outraged because it's happening to us, But we read about it in history, and there was an us that was just as upset about it as we are now. This is the collapsing civilization because we're shifting. So where does our security come from? So this is a great time, an absolutely great time to realize, I have no control over that. The only control I have is over myself. And if I gain mastery over myself, then you have learned the lesson. And this is one of the reasons why Master said those who are awakening to God will be protected. Because if you're already learning the karmic lesson, you don't have to have it pounded into your head. But the degree to which we are still afraid, still resisting, still declaring that I want it to be different, still thinking that some president or some dictator or somebody is doing it to me, then we'll just be subject to it. And I'm not saying any of this is easy. It shouldn't be easy. These are great lifetimes. All of the, death and return and all the pre-life past regressions, all the stuff that people are doing all these days, people are really excited about coming to Earth at this time. And your soul is really happy to be here. Your soul wanted to be here because, wow, this can be a real good chance to grow. You don't go to the university that's the easiest possible one for you. To go to the one where the people are really smart and it's really interesting, and it'll be challenging and you hope you can do it. You don't just take an incarnation to sleep through one more. You just think, wow, I really get to grow this time. I really get to reevaluate everything. So what are we supposed to do? And people are always asking me, should I be politically active? Should I pay attention? Should I not? Watch your inner consciousness. That's the single thing first. Don't feel that you have to constantly scare yourself to death with what's happening out there. Swami once described national news as nothing but gossip. It's just like talking about your neighbors. You can't do anything about it. They just are what they are. He kept informed enough, but it doesn't take much to keep informed. If you're constantly outraged at the presence of evil stupidity, what are you going to do about that? Evil stupidity exists. Evil exists. People get hypnotized by evil. You can just stand there and rail at it as much as you want. A little boy in one of our ashrams, we had this big house. He was a very strong-willed child. He woke up at 3 a.m. Nobody else was up. He was really bored. He walked into the middle of the house and screamed at the top of his lungs, "I want it to be morning," he said like that. He woke a lot of people up, but he didn't bring up the sun. How different are we? I want this ignorant, misguided person who happens to control my destiny because he runs a country, whatever country he happens or she happens to be running. I want them to be different. If you even say that about yourself, how far does that get you? You know, it's just the way it is. Reality always wins. Then you have to ask the question. This is the question you see has two ways of being asked. God, what are you doing? Or, God, what are you doing? Really, what are you doing? What is this bringing out of me? What limitations within myself am I having to face? What opportunities for growth are in front of me? And take them. I highly urge you to move into them, because then you won't have to be kicked or set on fire, because you're already be in motion. Or even if you are kicked, you can move with it. Oh well. And that doesn't mean your heart won't break. I go back to calmness. You know, there's a story, an autobiography of Lahiri Mahashaya, sitting in meditation and suddenly crying out, I'm drowning off the shores of Japan. And the ship was going down and souls were drowning. And he was so sensitive to the universal fabric of consciousness, he felt their fear. But he remained calm because he understood this is the karma, this just has to play forward. That doesn't mean you don't rush out to help. But how much more can you help if you're not angry and afraid? So we're in training. And this is very serious conversation. Someone asked, you know, I was wanting to talk about this. I wasn't sure when, but there it was. What should I do? I myself, I remain outside of participating. It's just too many shades of gray for me. What's going on in the world is too much. This one is, yes, less terrible than that one, but there are very few that are good. And the whole Swami himself said democracy is a very bad system. It's just better than the alternatives that we have right at this stage. What we need is, you know, we need to be ruled by saints. But we don't have that yet. So we're ruled by other human beings who just do what they do. And some of them are worse than others. There's no question about it. But I can't give my heart to any of them. Plus, all they're doing is trying to change circumstances. And what we have to do is open our hearts in slightly different ways, very different ways. There's some American politician in Texas who's bringing a different definition of Christianity, and he was attacked by other clergy because of his theology. And simple, wonderful line, he said, no matter how much you hate me, I will love you more. Isn't that just simple and beautiful? You know, no matter how difficult it gets, it will just be my incentive to be more compassionate, to have more faith in God, to cling more mightily to Divine Mother. And then, I don't know, if I have to get the babies out of the Warsaw Ghetto, I'm ready to do it. I pay attention, you know, and we're teetering sometimes on the edge of that. I don't know. We'll have to see, won't we? Okay, one last thing, and then I'll let my friend sing a little bit. I'd mentioned earlier, I truncated the story about, you know, asking Swamiji what to do in a crisis. That my mental thing had to do with being in a concentration camp. You know, if something starts happening to the person next to me, do I interfere? Do I throw my life away in order to protect someone else, even if it's futile? And that was when Swami said to me, in a moment of crisis, you will go true to pattern. You will not be able to change your consciousness at the last second. You have to be working. You have to practice when it's easier. And so that's where we are right now. We have to start practicing. We have to start practicing not being afraid, trusting God, and no matter how evil they may be, I will love you more. Now, don't misunderstand me. We do not have the power to love them into awakening. But we do have the power to see them as children of God doing what they need to do. But even Yogananda said, even in higher ages, we will still need a global police force. He said, because there will always be bullies. And so you don't treat bullies by saying, oh, nice, nice, be a good boy. You have to stand up to it. So I'm not by any means asserting any specific behavior. I'm saying you have to be able to feel what God wants you to do, and if you want to know that, you have to practice all the time. And along the way, you'll also be making your own karma a lot better. Yeah, and making yourself a lot stronger. So isn't this good? If everything was just cozy, comfortable for everybody, we were just looking at, nice weather and good economy and everybody being nice with each other, what would be our incentive? Is that a better incarnation than the one in which you really have to get to work?